Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolford. I'm a fourth-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stitch Please podcast. I am your host, Lisa Woolford, and as I always say for every episode, I am delighted to be speaking with the guest that we're talking with today. We are talking with Deborah Grayson, and I'm so glad to welcome Deborah to the program. I'm going to read, I know we don't do this, but I'm going to read a little bit of a bio about Deborah, just so you can know why I am so excited to have her here today speaking with us. Deborah Grayson was born and raised in Washington, D.C. and Montgomery County, Maryland. She maintains an active art and studio practice in Northeast Washington, D.C. She holds a BA in English, Lang and Lit from the University of Maryland, College Park, and an MA and PhD from Michigan State University in American Studies. Now, American Studies is an interdisciplinary degree that allows Deborah to pursue her interests in science, technology, and material culture. Deborah uses different types of media in her work to form magical and actual glimpses into the interior lives of Black women. These visual spaces show Black women as vulnerable, strong, fragile, bold, comfortable in our own skin, and free to express a full range of emotion. In her work, delicate and bold lines rendered in ink, graphite, oil, or gouache are layered on canvas and wood to tell these stories. So you might you might understand a bit now why I am so thrilled to have Deborah Grayson on the program today. Deborah, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. I'm happy to be here. Kind of excited.
This is super excited because Deborah, you are just so amazing. You're so just powerfully creative. You have such a beautiful, bold vision, and you render that in such ways that are so delicate and yet so strong. And so it's just really amazing to talk to someone also who has such a firm hold in the visual art world. And so I'm really interested in how that translates to your sewing. So I think my first question is, what connections do you see between, well, maybe the first question should be, how did your sewing journey begin? How would you describe your sewing story?
I think, believe it or not, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a fashion designer. I love clothes. Both my parents and my grandparents were just very stylish people. And my father would always tell me stories about how when he would go out, he would always be dressed really well, and he pressed what was then called his dungarees.
Oh, yeah.
Or his slacks. And so I was just always interested in fabric and how it draped on the body and how it could serve as a form of creative expression. But in terms of sewing, I didn't really get interested in sewing until I was in graduate school. I was working my dissertation, and to kind of deal with the isolation of sitting in the library writing all day, I would go over to the Looking Glass quilt shop in Ann Arbor, and I started quilting, and I started sewing some of my first cloth dolls at that point. So, and then from there, I kind of got into sewing tops and things like that. But it was just a nice kind of break from being in my head all the time. So.
It's so funny that you say that, because my story is very similar. That, but I grew up with, women who sewed and sewed and sewed, and I didn't want anything to do with it. But when I was in graduate school, especially working on the dissertation, I just felt like I wanted something that I could start and finish within like a reasonable period of time. Because writing that dissertation took me forever. So That was so. So you're saying you started as with the was the what was the first thing you remember making? Do you remember what the first thing you made was?
Yeah, my crazy behind decided I was going to make a double wedding ring quilt
Oh my
as,
God!
as my first quilt. I did it too. I don't know
Of course you
how, but
did
I
it.
did
Like,
it.
oh, that ain't no thing but a
Yeah.
chicken wing. Let me get them rings on.
And then from there, I got really into applique, and I liked the Baltimore wedding quilts, except I was more into what Harriet Powers was doing. And I have to say, one of my major professors when I was an undergrad at Maryland was Gladys Marie Fry. And
Oh yes, I'm
yeah,
very
and
familiar with her work. I saw her give a lecture here. She's amazing.
oh, she was phenomenal, and she was quite the mentor. And I stayed connected with her until her passing, actually. And so knowing what Harriet Powers did with the quilt, I'm like, well, this is an interesting way to tell stories. And so that was a rabbit hole I went down. And it was a good way to combine drawing and sewing. So that was another kind of outlet for me.
Oh, that is excellent. So what we're talking about here, if you're not familiar, Harriet Powers is an enslaved woman who is known for the Bible quilt. And I think that quilt might even be on display at the museum, at the African American Museum in D.C., the Smithsonian. Is that true? Do you know if that's there?
I don't remember seeing it. It could be I know that there was one in Boston, and I think
Yes.
there was one in Georgia for a while. But you may be right. It's been a while since I've been at the museum. I can't remember. I think there's also one at Clark Atlanta in the library, if I'm not mistaken.
And what she's illustrating is this story. Like one of my favorite panels in that quilt is the night the stars fell,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the story of, it must have been a meteor shower. Is that what we would call it when like a bunch of stars, or it looks like a bunch of stars are kind of falling? And I think that incident was like a prophecy or a prophecy, that some people saw that in prophecy, or
Mm-hmm.
saw that as a sign of prophecy. And so I don't know, I just really love how she did that. But I love this idea of thinking about applique as a form of drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you are doing is applying fabric to a solid quilt or a solid field of fabric. And these images are just so, well, at least hers are so powerful and yours are so powerful. That's amazing. So you made your first thing wasn't like, a tote bag.
No.
It was a double, you're like, I got a bunch of tote bags. You know what I don't have? A double wedding ring quilt.
Yeah, it was interesting because I had gone to another quilt shop. At that point, I guess I had moved. I was in New York, and then I moved to Atlanta. And I would go to these stores and take classes, and I would always upset the teachers. One, because I never used the dead colors that they always wanted me to use, these like browns and grays. I mean, just kind of really grayed down colors. Mine were always really bright. And two, I never followed the pattern, and so they would always get upset with me. So, yeah.
You were a rebellious quilt workshop student.
Well, to me, it was just about expressing creativity. Who wants to make something someone already made? I mean, for me, that's what I was thinking. But I'm not knocking patterns, but I just wanted to do something different. So.
It is very interesting because I know there's some people who are of the opinion that you have to know the rules before you break them. And there's other people who say, why would you begin with a position of confinement? Why not start from a position of openness and see where that takes you? Like, what do you think about that distinction? Do you think that's an accurate distinction between the two things? Like, someone has to come in and follow all the rules and learn all the tools and learn all the this and that and do it that way, and then maybe as you get confident, you can do your own thing?
I mean, I've heard that, and I know that that's a way of learning. And I know I like to study. I definitely like to study what's come before me, and then I like to throw it away and try to figure out how to, reinterpret it or interpret it in ways that are interesting to me. So I feel like whatever gets you into it and feeds your soul, feeds your interest, do it. So I guess that's how I would answer that.
I think it's a good answer, because for me, I definitely notice that for some folks who are quilters, like they want the exact it's like they want the exact thing that the pattern says. So that's why they have patterns, and they have sometimes they'll sell like
Kids.
jelly roll
Yeah.
kits or fabric kits that go with the pattern, so that basically at the end of, like, say for example you're doing a block of the month club, that here's the block of the month club block, and here's all the fabric for the block of the month club block. And at the end of the year, you will end up with a quilt that looks exactly like the quilt on the pattern envelope that thousands of other people have also made. And that doesn't appeal to me. Tell me more about your thoughts on that.
Well, I was just going to say that took the most fun part out of the equation for me, because the exciting part is selecting the fabric and selecting the colors and deciding how you want to put the thing you want to put together to express what it is you want to express. And so, again, I'm not knocking it. I know plenty of people like that style. It didn't do much for me. It didn't interest me. So when I saw the kits, I was like, why would I want to do that? So even if I bought the kit, say I like the pattern, but I wouldn't use the fabric in the kit. I just wanted the pattern, and then I would go do what I wanted to do with it. I would give the fabric to somebody else. So
it's so funny because the story you're telling reminds me of when I spoke with Bonita Hinton. She does machine embroidery and digitizing machine embroidery designs, and she said almost the exact same thing. She would go to these shops and learn how to do digitizing, and they were like, okay, now we're going to make our daisy chain of embroidery designs, and she was like, I don't want to make that. Like, okay, now we're going to make a little sailboat, and she's like, and I don't want to make that either. I did not come to learn to make that. I came to learn the techniques.
Exactly.
And so, and how we can, I think one of the things that I love about what you're saying is that I think that there's a strange balance between like creative expression and structure, right? That here's a pattern, here's a quilt block, here's a tutorial or whatever. And there are folks who want it to look exactly the same way. And then there are people who are very comfortable, or their first instinct is to improvise. And it makes me wonder sometimes, like, why do we not have more improvisation in the sewing space? I think that even now improvising has become, I think, rather co-opted.
Yes.
There's a pattern company, I won't say, but there's a pattern company, a Big Four pattern company that has a whole line of patterns now called hacking. That's saying, oh, here's a base garment, and now you can do this sleeve or that sleeve. And I'm like, but do we need to be told that? Or, I mean, I don't know. I'm of two minds about it, but me, I'll buy the patterns and put it in the pattern drawer and never look at it twice. So,
I mean, it's really interesting to me because I think it's kind of a way of thinking. I mean, I've taught quilting before. I used to teach a beginning quilt class for a while. And it was so interesting to me to see the reactions of some of the students when I would give some broad guidelines and suggest that they go off and do their thing. And it would create anxiety in some students. They really wanted me to take them step by step.
Yes.
And so I had to learn to teach both ways. I admit initially that would frustrate me. I'm like, I'm giving you the keys, go,
Yes, here. But they're like, but I don't know how to
drive. Yeah. So yeah, I had to, it's interesting to me. Not everyone is wired that way. So yeah.
And I think it takes time to kind of grow into creativity, that sometimes, I think that when I was doing some early studying on this topic as well for some writing I was doing, I did this survey of quilt books. And so many of them were like very aggressive about the 1/4 inch seam allowance, for example.
Yes.
Like,
and matching points.
In the matching points. And your quilt is basically wrong or broken if it doesn't have these things, and I understand it. I know if you're doing a round robin and, you need to have this quilt block measure this measurement, and somebody has a drunk 1/4 inch seam allowance or a really generous one or a really skimpy one, that, I can see that would be frustrating. But so that makes sense to me. But then other parts of it are just like, why are you so, it felt punitive. It felt like if you do this wrong, or if this is a scant off, then your whole quilt is trash.
Well, I mean, I know you've heard stories of the quilt police, and so I spent a good portion of my early quilting life blowing up stuff that the quilt police wanted me to do. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
It's so funny about the things that they police and the things that they don't police. You know, and I think this is one of the things I love about the work that you do and your overall approach is because it's so deeply personal. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the quilt book says or the quilt pattern says or the quilt teacher even says. It's about the relationship between this individual quilter, this person who wants to sit down and create something beautiful, and their vision and execution of that, you know? And so, like, I don't know, I just feel like we have so many other aspects of our lives that are policed, especially for Black people. Like,
I know, right?
Actual police.
Right.
Like, I don't have any patience for, somehow being, so robustly and roundly critiqued for, one thing or another in the quilting community, right? Like, sometimes my quilts don't lay flat. I have a quilt on my wall right now that I actually love, and I spent so much time making. I made it a few years ago. I got it started at the 5440 retreat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're a group in
North Carolina?
No. These folks are in Virginia. They're on the eastern, like in the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area.
Okay.
And it's an African American quilt guild. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, I believe, in 2018.
Wow.
And that's when I went to their retreat.
I don't know why I thought they were in North Carolina, but yeah, I've heard of them. They're fabulous.
Yeah, they do really great work. It was a fun time. It was a really fun time. I met some people there. I met a lot of people there because I didn't know anybody when I went. And it was just so amazing, Deborah, to be in this room of African-American women and just to see the difference for someone like me whose formative years in quilting were from a white Midwestern tradition, because I went to school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And that's where I started sewing and quilting. And it was all white people. I was always the only Black person. I was always the youngest. And to go to this place now where it was like all Black women and the work they would put up and show, it was just like mind blowing. And so I had that quilt up on my wall. Deborah, is there a binding on that quilt? No, it is not, because I hung that junk up there. I quilted it beautifully. I did a lot of fine line quilting and detail on it. I used variegated threads. It's this beautiful applique of my family that I did as kind of a photo style that I'd learned. And I hung that junk up there. No binding. No, and who knows? It might even be ripply, probably, because all my quilts tend to be ripply. And
mine too.
I know there's a way that the quilt folks can teach us about to get our quilts to lie flat. But at the end of the day, I don't care that much, right? Like, I don't mind if my quilt is not jury selection perfect. Like,
well, that's not why I did it. I mean, my great grandmother was a quilter, and she made quilts for each of her children, and my great aunt gave them. I have two of them before she passed, and I call them my magic quilts. Those things are heavy, but they have fabrics. My mother told me from my grandmother and my mother, and many of the women, some of my uncles in the family, and so. If I'm having a bad day or something, I'll wrap myself in that thing. I don't care how hot it is, because it just feels like a hug, just knowing that her hands touch that, so, yeah.
That is beautiful. Absolutely. Absolutely. So can we spend some time talking about one of the phrases that you use, and I've heard you use before, and I think I used it when I read the early introductory remarks. And that is the idea of studio practice. And so I want to take a quick pause. But when we come back, we'll learn more about studio practice with Deborah Grayson after this break. the Stitch Please podcast is really growing. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast and ask a favor. If you are listening to this podcast on a medium that allows you to rate it or review it, for example, Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please do so. If you're enjoying the podcast, if you could drop me a 5-star rating, if you have something to say about the podcast, and you wanted to include that, a couple sentences in the review box of Apple makes a really big difference in how the podcast is evaluated by Apple, how it becomes more visible. It really is a way to kind of lean into the algorithm that helps to rank podcasts. So if you had time to do that, to drop a little line in the review feature of the podcast, that would be really appreciated, and it would help us to grow even further and faster. We're back, and I'm talking today with Deborah Grayson. And Deborah, I have to tell you, in my phone, I have you listed as Deborah Artist. And sometimes I'm like, oh, wait, I got to send Deborah something. Let me look up, what's her real name again? What's her government name? And I put you down as Deborah Artist because I just think that's who you are.
Yeah.
Right? And so can you talk a bit about the phrase studio practice? And I think whenever I hear you say that, for some reason, it makes me feel relaxed. It makes me feel like yoga for my creativity. I don't know. Tell me about studio practice.
Sure. I guess for me, practice or having a practice means that you are focused or committed to doing something on a regular basis. And so, yes, having a yoga practice could be an equivalent. For me, the studio practice, I'm lucky enough to have a wonderful studio in an old warehouse in Northeast DC, and it's my magical place. I mean, I would leave my notebooks and briefcase in the car. I would change my clothes and my shoes. I put on my clogs, and I slide the doors open, and that's the place where I go to make things, from sculpting to printing. I used to sew there, but I brought all my sewing stuff home. But yeah. So it's where I regularly go to do my creative work.
I love that. And I wanted to talk about the dolls and the soft sculptures, And it seems like I'm looking at how you think about the difference between sewing, like on a sewing machine, like to make a garment, and doll making. Or soft sculptures. Do you see, I guess I was going to say something stupid. I was going to say, the dolls are like a 3-dimensional object, but then so are clothes. Right. So I can't even make that kind of connection. But it just feels like the dolls and the soft sculptures they seem more, I don't know. I don't know if they're as different as I'm about. They seem very different to me. Mm-hmm. Like I've made a couple of dolls before, but these were, dolls for my nieces, and they were, cut on this line, sew on this line, stuff it with the stuffing. I mean, and even then I thought I was doing something.
You were.
Yeah. I was completely following the pattern to the absolute letter. So I could get this absolute thing to give to this little girl. But tell me about your process in creating dolls and soft sculptures. And are those terms different? Like does a doll mean one thing and a soft sculpture something else to you?
Yeah, I love those questions. So I think for me, doll making or sculpture comes from a different place. I mean, I'm sewing those like I sew garments, but I'm usually sewing my own patterns. And usually I will draw it on the paper, cut it out, stitch it, stuff it, and just keep fiddling with it until I get the shape that I want. I think that... and I forgot, I lost the train of thought related to your question. What was the other part of the question?
It was about the connection between a doll and a soft sculpture. Like, do you see these as two different things?
Thank you. Yeah. So I do see them as somewhat separate. I admit that at times I resist the word doll because in U.S. culture, it's often thought of as a toy or a plaything, and it's considered a lesser art object, if you will. Whereas in other cultures around the world, dolls are part of a spiritual practice, or they're amulets, or, they're used to represent ancestors who passed on. And so I'm thinking about all of those things when I make work. I did start out making dolls. I made them for my goddaughters. And it was funny. What I found was that grown women wanted the dolls. so I stopped. And there's a whole different approach when you're making a doll for a child versus an adult. And I found that I much more enjoy making dolls for adults because of the nostalgia, because a lot of women of a certain generation didn't have brown dolls. I was fortunate enough to have them, but a lot of women had not seen them or never had them. And there's a huge audience out there of collectors. And so for a long time, for probably about 15 years, I made cloth dolls. They were completely cloth, painted faces, fiber hair, and I had a whole line of collectors for those, and they were called Urban Wildflower dolls. And so I did that for a while. And then I got more into the sculptural part, which includes more mixed media. So then I started working with ceramic clay. I started incorporating beads and metal and wood. And someone said, if you really want to continue to sell these in the market based on the hierarchy that happens in the arts, you probably want to call your work sculpture. Because if you call your work dolls, that galleries and museums will get kind of scared away. So I don't know. I kind of played that game, but not really. So I'm fine with calling them either thing, but I admit sometimes I cringe a little bit when I hear doll, just because I know that people think doll, they think cute, they think toy, and that's not what I'm doing. So.
No, I love that. Thank you so much for that distinction.
Sure.
And I really love the way that you connected it back to practices around the world, where these same things might be amulets. It might be something you put on a shrine that you have in your home, to pay tribute to ancestors. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many uses beyond the way that we might think of these things, and the idea of but the idea of using a different vocabulary to kind of elevate the seriousness. Mm-hmm. It's also interesting to me about the feminization and how that becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Right. That if it's a doll, then it's something that maybe girls will like, or women will like, or children will like, and as a result, it loses its value.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's it.
I was going to say, and I mean, I love what you just said there, and it kind of played into a series of figures I've been making probably for the last 5 to 7 years. Before I left Atlanta to move back to DC, a friend of mine had invited me to her home to, sell my dolls, and I said, well, I need to have some things at different price points. So I started making these little figures. I call them power totems. And they're these I call them little magical, powerful figures. And I was shocked at the response to these figures. But it's all about, having a vehicle or an altar or a place to house, exhibit, share, experience power. So I started putting them inside these little boxes, and you can actually build altars around them.
I see these now in, is this what you have in your mixed media section, the mixed media sculpture with magic, myth, and memory?
That's it.
And you have one called Sankofa. There's one called Diana, Camilla. How did you come up with these names?
Women who inspire me, women that I know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at these right now, and they are absolutely stunning. I wanted to talk a bit about, to get your thoughts on the distinction between art and craft. I go round and round on this. I'm not an artist, though I study popular culture and those types of things, in my academic life. Mm-hmm. But I really have not found a good answer to this question about the distinction between art and craft.
Because there isn't one.
Well, say more, please.
Well, excuse me. I think, again, it's so interesting. And I think I could be wrong, but I find it very much so in Western culture, and particularly in U.S. culture, these hierarchies that need to be created. And they often are connected to gender and race and economic status. I really don't make a distinction. I think, I consider myself an artist and maker of things. And so I love constructing things with my hands. And I think that the soft sculpture I make is a type of art. And I think my oil paintings are a type of art. And I resist those kinds of hierarchies. I don't find them interesting. And to your point, most people can't really explain the difference. But still, there are all these rules that have popped up around the industry about what you can show, what you can't show, where you show, what people will think if you show in like an art fair versus a gallery. And that's why I'm kind of glad I decided not to go to art school, because I think I might have been more affected by some of that stuff if I had. So.
Yeah, I hear that. I really do hear that. And I don't know why. I mean, I wonder too, even in me asking the question, in what ways is that reinforcing this need for the hierarchy? I just feel like I've been going back and forth around this, the idea of, art versus folk art. All of this, as you said, is, I think you're absolutely right, that these distinctions are based on, I don't know who is demanding them. Is it capitalism that's demanding them? Is it, art and fine art and folk art and heritage art, like all of these different words to describe what is essentially the same thing.
Right.
And I'm not sure if it's capitalism, if it's idea of like market development. I don't know, but it just feels like something. It feels like an artificial overlay over something that is so powerful and so essential and necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I do wonder about that. I wonder about that a lot. And that's an idea that I hold in my head a lot. There was another one too, another kind of distinction.
Self-taught versus trained. That's my favorite one. So you're self-taught if you don't have an MFA. And I said to one person, well, I have a PhD, so that trumps that.
I mean, self-taught versus the shade of it all.
Yeah,
though,
it's
right?
very shady. And I think it's all of the elements that you describe, but I have not heard one succinct, clear explanation. And the only thing I can draw from all of that is that these hierarchies are created for exclusivity and to make some people's work more valuable than others. And so that is, if you have women artists, and that's why, quilts are considered folk art or craft, and sculptures fine art. But it's funny because even women who are fine artists kind of run into some of that same stuff. And then you layer all these other identities on it. It's the same thing. So I just don't subscribe to it. I don't want to do it. And that's not to say that not subscribing to it doesn't cost you things, because it does. But I think it's just better not to try to uphold those old structures and to do something different.
Because I think you're right. At the end of the day, who is being served by this?
Mm-hmm.
Who is somehow saying, oh, you know what? My life is so much better now that I have a clear understanding of who I can put on one side of the line and who I can put on the other side of the line.
But there are people who are heavily invested in it. Yeah, it's real interesting. So.
Let's talk about what you have going on now. But can we talk really quickly about the Everyday Goddesses series?
Because, sure.
Oh my gosh, those are amazing. And I was very proud of myself for identifying Martina in the Light as a picture of you. So I think we could talk about how astute I am. I always love hearing that. But this is under the drawing category of your website. And are these prints? Like, what's the process that I'm looking at? In the Martina in the Light image?
It's mixed media. So what I was doing monoprints where I would use a surface, glass, plastic, or you'll see those jelly print blocks, and I'd lay things on top of whatever the substrate was, roll out ink, and then rub the paper on there, and I would get these different backgrounds, and I would just keep layering color, layering texture, layering objects. And so I would just do that all day in the studio. I would have sheets of paper all over the floor. And then from there, I would pick the ones that were really interesting to me, size them down to the size. And the Everyday Goddesses, they're all, I think, 9 by 12. And then from there, I would draw on top of them with ink or gouache, which is an opaque type of watercolor paint. And so the Everyday Goddesses are women that I would meet, I run into in the coffee shop or sitting on a bench, or because it's interesting. I don't know what it is. I will sit down and inevitably someone will come and sit and start to talk and they would tell me their stories. And I don't know. This always happens to me, standing in the motor vehicle department, I was literally sitting in a park one day and somebody just sat down. And so I'd end up listening and I would say, do you mind if I take a few pictures? I'm an artist, and I would show them, some of the work I'd done. And then I would take pictures and I would use the photos as references. And so these are everyday women. And there's an additional layer to it because with all of the gentrification and in some ways really killing the soul of the city of DC as I had grown up in it and come to love it, I've just been noticing landmarks in the city, African Americans really being erased, or what used to stand there is now just a plaque. They did the same thing with Chinatown. The stadium is there now, or the Phillips Arena is there now. So it's my way of kind of retaining the story by drawing photos or drawing from photos of women, everyday women in the city. And I was doing a contemporary version, pardon me, and then I had been given this collection of photos of Black families from the 1920s through the 1970s. And so there's an image, I think, of a woman standing. I can't remember what category it's in. But this was a woman from the 1940s in DC, and I was able to draw her entire family from the 40s all the way up to the 70s. And one of her children saw the photo, or I think must have been grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Anyway, they bought one of the images from the series. So that's what that is. It's just everyday women that I think, I want to tell their stories, retain their stories.
I love this. And there's so much about it to love that's getting me excited. One, it's like it reminds me of when you started doing the mixed media series and you were thinking about these as totems or as ways to, to honor the ancestors. You could use the frame boxes that you created as a centerpiece or part of an altar. Mm-hmm. And it also kind of makes me think that people, that certain spirits, and I don't mean spirits in like sense of malevolence, but this energy of Black life and Black love that is continuing to kind of to come to you, right? Yes, yes. So someone just comes to you and it's like, let me just tell her. I don't know. It's almost like you're like a griot, kind of, right? Yeah. Like, griots are African storytellers. I know you know this. I'm just saying this for general. Griots are African storytellers who hold deep cultural memory. Mm-hmm. And so they tend to be older people, and then they train younger people in the telling of these same stories so that the stories don't get lost. And that's what I think Everyday Goddesses is doing. I think as we move through, and different communities around the country move through gentrification, efforts where Black people end up being replaced by Black Lives Matter signs in the lawns of white people, right?
Yes.
It's true.
I know. That's why, it's an uncomfortable laugh, but yeah, I know it's true.
Yeah, and so to kind of have these images, it's so powerful. I want to talk a bit about color. Mm-hmm. I was struck by something you said earlier about going to your earliest quilt classes, and they would want you to play with these dead colors, mm-hmm. right? Flat things. Mm-hmm. And your training, your eye, your interests are brighter, right? Mm-hmm. So can we talk about the idea of color? As color, the way you use it in painting, color as in how you choose fabrics, and maybe can we think about color as how about this? Do you think about color as a language or a vocabulary?
Ooh, Both.
That was good, right?
Yes, that's
Sometimes
very good.
that
Thank
English
you.
PhD, that
Thank
shit
you,
comes in
Doc.
handy, right?
You working it out, yeah.
Yeah. Wear it out.
Yeah. So I think it's both. But you tell me. So how I come at color. Color is very intuitive. It's also spiritual to me. Um, and without sounding too woo-woo, people show up to me as color. And I don't mean, skin color. I mean, when I see people, I see colors around them.
Yeah.
And so I know some people are going to think, what is wrong with this woman?
Hey, give me all the woo-woo. We have a very wide and diverse audience for the Stitch Please podcast, and some people are very woo-woo. So let's not even call it woo-woo because that can be seen as offensive to some people.
Okay, good.
Let's just call it a very broad platform of understanding that includes the seen and the unseen world. How about that?
I love that. I mean, that's funny because my dissertation was called The Hyper-Invisible Woman. But
Perfect.
I don't often talk about it a lot because I know that not everybody has a broad perspective, I'll put it that way. But I do tend to see extra layers of color around things that already have color. And so to my eye, what's pleasing are bright colors paired with things that are seemingly discordant that wouldn't necessarily go together in most people's palettes. I like really bright paired with grayed down neutrals. But I like clear, crisp, bright color that's not grayed down, that I like to work with, for lack of a better word, a pure pigment for when I'm designing things. And I think people don't always understand that even when you're using primaries, it's the type of primary color, red, yellow, blue, that you're using that will impact what you ultimately get in the color. So if you start with mud, you're going to get more mud. And we'll talk about this later. I'm teaching a dye class to kind of teach people how to work with those kinds of colors to get bright colors. And, I'm not the kind of person who uses the color right out of the tube or right out of the dye jar. I think you don't get a level of complexity when you use color in that way. And so I love to layer color, especially in dyeing because it's transparent. You dye something one color and then you over dye it or dye it again, and you can really, impact that color. The bottom color still shows through, but depending on what you layer on top of it, you can tilt it in a totally different direction. And a similar thing, with oil paints or watercolor or even fabric, there's a way to play with fabric that will trick your eye into seeing different types of transparency depending on what you put a color next to. So, I mean, I haven't had any formal training in it, but I know what I like and I know what I see, and I put those things together and they seem to work.
And you have done some study of this, right? That you might not have, like you said, that formal training, but you also have an extensive training in your own record keeping.
Yeah.
So let's transition to talk about the dye class that's coming up, y'all. This is just going to be happening in a couple of weeks. So you have time to go to Deborah Grayson's website and click on it, and you are going to see something amazing. And these are going to be her colorful findings classes. So let's start with, this is a great opportunity to talk about how you got bit by the bra making bug. Can we talk about that, please?
Yes.
I really wanted to talk about the squirrel in your pants because I don't know if we're going to have time for that. But now that I feel like I put the squirrel in your pants out there, people are going to want to know what that's about.
Oh my goodness!
So the squirrel in your pants is. The squirrel in your pants is a lovely story about Deborah sewing a pair of pants that had what we could call unexpected results. You want to tell us about the squirrel in the pants, and then we can talk, because I wanted to transition to talk a bit about sewing.
Sure. So I'm fairly tall, and I have a 33, almost 34-inch inseam in my pants, and so I was learning to tailor pants to my body. And let's just say my first attempt didn't work out that well. And from my waist to my crotch, I had this kind of weird kind of squirrely bulge is the only way I could describe it. It looked like, the fabric was so ripply, like a squirrel could be running around in there. So for some reason that tickled the Black Women Stitch folks when I said that, but that's what it looked like to me. So that's where
Y'all,
that
when
came
Deborah
from.
said it looked like she had a squirrel in her pants, I think I nearly lost my shit. I just had this image of like a squirrel like running around one of the base of her legs. And, it was hilarious.
And they were so baggy, they probably could have. I think of like the Cinderella. I think, those were mice though, where they ran around her dress.
No mice. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. They did the sewing and all this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I want to talk about you and the bra sewing because
Sure.
this is something that we've been doing. I think actually Black Women Stitch, like a lot of us started sewing. Well, one of us, Dewan Coburn, she's been sewing bras for decades. So that's no big thing for her. But like, I think a lot of us got the bug at the most recent 2020 Beach Week retreat, which was like our last in-person event. And oh, okay.
There you are.
Let's try again. That we got the bra sewing bug kind of took off in March of 2020. I made one. I made one that I liked. I had made some before that I didn't love, but this one I actually really liked. And then Nikki was there, and she, has really taken off with the bra making. And now there's going to be a bra making. There's bra making classes with Nikki, Dewan, and Naomi doing bra making during the month of August, and something big coming up in October. So you were a bit reluctant, I thought, about bra sewing in the beginning. I think so. Can you talk a bit about how you switched over? Like what switched for you? Because you went from being what I thought was a little skeptical about bra making.
No, it was more than skeptical. I had zero interest in it. Let's just be real. I was like, I have no desire to do that. Why would I do that? And then I kept watching, and it was just so funny because I kept seeing people putting their breast on the glass.
Put your titties on the glass so you can see how this bra looks.
After they made their bras. And then I thought, And part of why I wasn't that interested, I have to say, some of it was color because I wasn't seeing colors that I wanted. And then I was under the mistaken impression that it was just more complicated, all those little pieces than I thought. But then Dwan was going to do a sew-along for all of us. And I had been collecting patterns. I said, well, maybe one day. And I thought, well, okay, I'll join the sew-along. And then that's happened at the same time that Nikki, Dwan, and Naomi started the class. And so I sat in. And then I really got into it because I love construction. I love figuring out how things go together. And after I made that first bra, I think I had lost my mind, and I've made a bra a week ever since then.
I know, and they are all gorgeous. And I mean, y'all, you should check out Deborah Grayson's Instagram page, and you'll see these bras and I like to say each one is prettier than the last, but it's hard to even rank them because they are all so stunning. And one of the things that makes them so distinct is the color, the intensity of the colors, the way she's able to put together something like the way that the channeling of a bra looks versus, the front band or the cups or whatever. I mean, they really are absolutely lovely and just fun.
Yeah, thank you.
So they're really beautiful. So tell us about what we can learn in these. So now you are going to be having some classes that are coming up soon. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. Well, thanks to the inspiration and encouragement from all the Black Women Stitch Charter members and the fact that they have harassed me to no end. Teach a dye class, Deborah. You should teach a dye class.
No end at all. I'm surprised you're not getting text messages in the middle of the night just being like, how's that dye class going?
Actually, I do. So, but I decided to go ahead and do a class. And so it's a suite of classes. There are 3. The first one is an introduction, and that's the longest one. And it teaches how to use acid dyes. And the acid just refers to the use of vinegar or citric acid to work along with the dye to make the dye bind to the fabric. So I'll be teaching how to dye, color wheel, how to do immersion dyeing for nylon fabrics. It would work as for silk as well, but I'm only focusing on nylon. I'm designing these classes specific to sewists and bra makers in particular who want to figure out how to dye their own findings, because a lot of the colors out there, especially for a power net, they're just not a lot of colors. So for myself, I just would buy the white fabric, and depending on whatever pop of color I wanted to use in my bra, I would go dye it. And then people were like, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Well, I dyed it." And so I'll show people how to mix their own dyes and get them going with 12 wonderful colors. From there, the second class teaches how to dye value gradation. So you start with a dark color, work all the way to the lightest light. And I think I'm going to do just 10 steps of color from dark to light in the class. And so again, if you know how to take a color and dye up and down the value of that color, you have a lot of choices to play with for your findings for your bras. And then the last class is how to dye between two colors. So say I take a yellow and a purple, and I add a little bit of that color until I get to the middle, and I have a 50-50 of each. Again, you have a whole range of colors. So with those three classes, I think you can dye all kinds of colors and just keep playing. And the thing that I'm telling people is you could do all of this with just three colors. You don't have to buy every dye in the dye shop. I have 6 colors that I typically use to dye all of the things that people see that I'm dyeing. I have 2 sets of primaries that I use. So in the class, you'll learn about those primaries, how to put them together, and how to play with them to come up with hundreds of different sets of colors. So I'm excited. It launches on August 28th, and I just have the descriptions now, but probably when this airs, you'll be able to, the registration will be live and you can sign up. The first class, I think, will only have about 25 slots. So.
And I see that you have all these wonderful supporting materials that you're using for the class, that people who participate as students get downloadable handouts, they get some consulting time with you. At least I see that on the second for course 2. And you're saying that course 1 is a prerequisite, right? You can't just jump to course 2 or course 3. You should start with course 1 in order to cover the basics. Is that right? In terms of the course progression, you want people to start at course 1. Is that correct?
Correct.
So tell us a bit about what it means to build the courses the way you've described them.
So I'll take a stab at that, and if I didn't answer your question, ask me again, and I'll try it again. So the first course is really the overview, all of the materials, the properties of the dyes, how to use them, and how to do just a basic immersion dye where you take one color, completely immerse your fibers or your fabric into the pot, and then take them out. That class also covers mixing dyes to get certain colors, and we're going to do an activity where we dye color wheel and we'll mix colors. So by the time you finish that first class, you will have learned how to dye 12 different colors using 3 dyes to do that, if that makes sense. So there's the dye, and then there's the dye solutions that we mix from the dye, which will allow you to create all of those colors. So the introduction is really the full overview of the process, how to use the dyes, what tools you need to do what we're going to do in the immersion dyeing. And then the other 2 classes are for those who want to learn more how to dye, values, and then how to mix between colors, like the next level. So that when you're done, you'll be able to dye hundreds of colors, and you'll have a sense of what to put together to get you to the color that you want to do or want to make.
That is amazing. I'm excited because I'm going to sign up, as I have mentioned to you several times.
Yes.
So I am really excited. And I feel like hearing more about it makes me feel like, okay, I can totally do this. So if someone who is like me or me, has no experience in dyeing anything. The only things I've ever dyed have been horrible accidents, like putting a red sock in the washing machine with my white towels by accident. And then I use that red stuff to kind of get the over dye out of it. But then your towels still end up looking weird and always slightly pink to you.
Right.
So I've only had I think negative accidental experiences with dyeing anything. But you're saying that with the right tools and the right training that you're going to give us, that we'll be able to do something, really beautiful out of just 3 things. You can get 12 colors out of 3.
Oh, you can get more than 12 colors out of 3. I'm just teaching you 12, but yes. Yes, and we will not be using RIT dyes. Let me make that very clear. RIT dyes are a type of acid dye, but there's a lot of other stuff in it. But no, we will not be using these. The dyes we're using are color fast, and meaning they won't run, and they're actually much cheaper than RIT dyes. And you can create many more colors and combinations with just the 3 dyes. So yeah.
Well,
and you don't need prior experience. I've made it as simple as possible.
Great. That's what I need to hear. I've made it. No prior experience necessary are my favorite words.
Right.
So to give us some confidence going into the process. Well, Deborah, this has been absolutely amazing. I am so glad that you were able to come on today, and I'm encouraging folks to check out Deborah's website and these workshops because you get to see me because I'm going to be there. Can you tell us where we can find you tell us any, other than the dye workshops you have coming up, are there any other projects you're excited about or things you're working on or sewing right now?
Yeah, so I'm sewing lots of clothes, mostly to look good from the waist up for all the Zoom meetings that I need to do.
Yes.
And also I'm launching a store. So for those folks who just have no interest in dyeing, but who really are interested in purchasing bold colors or an expanded flesh tone palette for their bras and bra findings, I will have a store popping up called Colorful Findings, same name as the class. And so I'll have all of that launching from my site shortly. So for now, if you go to my website, you can click to sign up for the mailing list. But probably, as I said, by the time this airs, the registration links will be available on my website, and also you can click right through Instagram to get to it. And on Instagram, my artwork is at GraysonStudios, and that's mostly prints and paintings. And then my textiles stuff is at GraysonStudios Textiles, only because to me, it just seemed weird to have paintings and bras in the same place. So I separated them, but that's the only reason. So if you want to see some of the bras that Lisa was talking about, I post pictures of them. I'm posting my underwear on the internet.
It's all art. It seems to me.
I would agree. So yes.
I get, and those bras are art. Oh my gosh, they are stunning. They are stunning. Well, Deborah, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you for sharing your gifts, the stories of your gifts, as well as the way that your artwork is really speaking to the past, present, and future. I'm just so grateful to be in community with you. And thank you for all that you do.
I was just about to say the same thing to you. Thank you for all that you do. This platform, Black Women Stitch, just bringing Black women, creators, makers together in this space. This is phenomenal. So thank you.
You've been listening to the Stitch Please podcast, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. We appreciate you supporting us by listening to the podcast. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, you can contact us at blackwomensstitch@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us financially, you can do that by supporting us on Patreon, Patreon, and you can find Black Women Stitch there in the Patreon directory. And for as little as $2 a month, you can help support the project with things like editing, transcripts, and other things to strengthen the podcast. And finally, if financial support is not something you can do right now, you can really, really help the podcast by rating it and reviewing it anywhere you listen to podcasts that allows you to review them. So I know that not all podcast directories or services allow for reviews, but for those who do, for those that have like a star rating or just ask for a few comments, if you could share those comments and say nice things about us at the Stitch Please podcast, that is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Come back next week and we'll help you get your stitch together.